And in this place, you'll pick up the context here as we read it. It says, "Then Peter came to him and said, 'Lord, how many times could my brother sin against me and I forgive him?'" Okay, well, that seems a pretty good question. He says, as many as 7 times? 7 times? That seems like a lot, right? 7's pretty good. Well, matter of fact, back in those days, it was accepted and even taught by rabbis that you should forgive someone 3 times, and that's it. 3 times for the same thing, and that's it. You're done. You don't have to forgive them anymore. But Peter steps up the game a little bit. He's probably thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to ask Jesus, and I'm going to say 7 times. That's more than double what I have to, according to the teachers around. And then let's see what Jesus says about that. He says, "I tell you, not as many as 7, but 70 times 7. So you mathematicians out there, 490. Okay, all right, I got it. Some of you are probably pushing the limit on some of your friends and family members, right? Every Thanksgiving adds up another couple of those things on there with your family and stuff. Or every day at work where your coworker adds that number, getting close to 490. Well, Jesus said that, of course, not to give us an exact number, but to say you got to forgive them every time. There's 2 basic things to see, though, 2 components of forgiveness and 2 ways that we have to act in forgiveness. The first is this. The first is to seek forgiveness, and the second one is to grant forgiveness. And we're going to start out today talking about seeking forgiveness. And so I want us to look at Matthew chapter 5, looking at verse 23. And Jesus, again, is giving some instruction, telling a mini parable here to those who are listening. He says, "So if you are offering your gift on the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother, then come and offer your gift." And so here he is. Jesus makes this bold declaration. And so why is this such a big deal? Well, let's look at a couple other scriptures that help illuminate that for us. Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 1, says, "Therefore, I, the prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, accepting one another in love, diligently keeping the unity of the Spirit with a peace that binds us." Diligently keeping the unity of the Spirit. We've got to do that. That's got to be on the forefront of our mind as we gather together. Romans 12 talks about this also. It says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Try to do what is honorable in everyone's eyes. And if possible, on your part, live at peace with everyone." Live at peace with everyone. Now, that everyone is encompassing not just those who are believers, but non-believers as well. But it definitely applies especially to believers, especially in light of the verse we just read before that. That with one another, we should be living in unity, not talking bad about each other, not gossiping about each other, but honoring one another in love, seeking, again, when we need it, seeking that to restore those relationships as God leads us to do that. And the interesting thing I want us to point out in that last verse is sometimes all we can do is approach the other person. Sometimes all we can do is go to them. We cannot make them forgive. Whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven will also forgive you your wrongdoing. When you're praying, whenever you're praying, forgive. You have something against someone, forgive them. At that moment, forgive them. Let it go. Forgive them of what they've done. Now some of you are saying, okay, you do not know what was done to me. You do not understand the depth of hurt and pain that came from that. I agree. Been there. Still working through some stuff myself, let's be honest. But yet, in our mind, in our attitude, we at least have to, before God, say, God, I want to. I don't want to with my heart or my emotion, but I want to honor you. I want to honor you. That is a early first step. We'll talk about that more in the coming days. Not minimizing this at all. We'll deal with the process that oftentimes forgiveness is for us through different difficult circumstances. But we see here, let's face it though, most stuff, a lot of things that are issues are ridiculous things. They're ridiculous over a comment someone said to us, or we saw somewhere, or over an opinion about how things should go or did go, or something like this, or how our political candidate was good or bad, or all this kind of stuff. Honestly, it's not important stuff between Christians. And those are the ones particularly that Jesus says, man, when you come in, when you're praying, guess what? Let it go. Get rid of it. Don't let that be a part of your life. But we see here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, Jesus said this, "You have heard it that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Step one is to pray. Step one is to pray. And to pray, we can't come to God praying in our own pride. Oh, God, I just wish you'd take care of them over there. They've done all this stuff wrong. No. You pray in humility towards God. And you don't pray that God would get justice. You just pray for them. You pray for blessing on them. You're like, blessing? Pray for my enemy, for this person who's wronged me, to get blessing? Well, I happen to believe that to be blessed by God, you have to be right with God. And if they've had such an offense against you, I have a feeling they're not right with God. So your prayer for them to get blessing actually is a prayer for them to be right with God. But you're not putting in those words. You're saying, God, bless them. Bless them. I want to talk now, just hit 5 things about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. Okay? What forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And this isn't inclusive of everything that it could be. We could put a lot more in here. But for today, these are the things we're going to talk about. Number 1, forgiveness is for you and not for them. Did you realize that? Forgiveness is more for us. For those who are harboring these things in our life. Because guess what? It can weigh you down. Chuck Swindoll calls it an anchor on your life when you are living in unforgiveness. The only thing harder than to forgive is to not forgive and to live with that. How many times are the things that still you're holding on to, the other person doesn't have a clue? They're living a different life somewhere else, doing something different. You're not on their mind, yet this weighs in on you day in sometimes and day out. Or once in a month, or every few weeks, this thing hits you. And it holds you back. It keeps you from what God wants. So number 1, forgiveness is for you, and it's not for them. Number 2, forgiveness is not condoning what happened. Some people say they don't want to forgive because they feel like that suddenly makes it okay. No, that's not it. It was not okay. You don't have to pretend that, and the other person doesn't have to feel that way either. The third thing is this: forgiveness is an act of the will. It's an act of the will. Corrie ten Boom said this: forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Isn't that true? It's almost, face it, love a lot of the times, guess what? Love is an act of the will too, isn't it? We do so many things out of love for our spouse or for other people, not because we feel like it, but we do it out of an act of love from our will because we are determined to show love to them in this particular manner. And the fourth thing we see here is forgiveness is not forgetting. Some people, you've heard the saying, forgive and forget. That's hard to do, especially on the things we're going to talk about in the next few weeks that are much deeper and longer, more deeply rooted in a longer trail of disaster in our lives. It's hard to forget those things, isn't it? Time helps, but it's hard. So we need to understand that forgiveness is not forgetting, and is not predicated on forgetting. It's not predicated on anything other than me acknowledging before God what He's forgiven me of, and choosing to operate in the way that He operated towards me. Mark Twain said this: forgiveness is the fragrance the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. I was reminded this past week of one of the most incredible acts of forgiveness that I've heard in such a long time. I was truly amazed by it, to be honest. And It was commemorated. Not that the forgiveness wasn't, but part of this was commemorated by the city of Dallas changing the name of part of a street to Botham Jean. Botham Jean, you may remember, was a young man that was killed in his own apartment by an off-duty police officer. Still don't know all the circumstances of those things. A tragic situation, loss of what looked like an incredible young life. But the more incredible thing to me was the grace and forgiveness that was broadcast not just locally, but around the country and I'm sure around the world about the family of Botham Jean who displayed incredible grace. Incredible grace. By at the trial saying, don't punish them too hard. We forgive you. We're forgiven. We forgive you. That is an incredible expression of grace that I believe could only come as it was by believers in Jesus Christ. To show such incredible mercy, grace, and love. God expects that from us as well on the trivial things and also even on the hard things.